how the market has started to progress. So I have a few thoughts and slides to share. About a year ago, the IPCC put this report out about the 1.5 to 2 degrees and the difference. And I think that was a game-changing report. Before then, the energy transition was acknowledged by a lot of people, but the sort of timing of it was always up for debate. And I think what's happened in the last 12 months is the sort of net zero by 2050 has become a sort of standard. So people aiming for that mid-century mark. So people like the UK government have signed up for that. So I think it has had real clarity to what's the goal, what's the end date, how do we get there. So I just wanted to share a few thoughts on how we look at it. There's country leadership needed, but there's also industry leadership needed. And we think about it in power, transport and industry. Agriculture we haven't quite got to, it's 23% of emissions, but we'll really need to get there fairly soon. On the power side, so just so you know, this is how much over the last 2 decades has been invested in wind and solar. So it's over 500 gigawatts each, tremendous growth from almost nothing at the beginning of the century. And that's enough to power the entire United States. So these technologies really do scale, they're really taking off. And that's because of this, the cost curves. So understanding technology cost curves is probably one of the most important things in the energy transition. And certain technologies have very steep learning curves. We've added in here from our classic wind and solar curves here, also the storage, battery storage. Battery storage has a learning rate of 18%, which actually means that every time you double capacity, it gets 18% cheaper. And in the next 3 or 4 years, capacity build-out is going to treble. There's going to be 3 times as much manufacturing capability in a very small number of years. So you can see how that curve is coming down. And that will add to solar, which has a learning rate of 28.5. It's from our team, the latest number, and about 15% on wind. So these are the technologies, wind, solar, batteries, plus software, which will wire these together, which are going to be very important. And so we believe that if people are choosing the lowest cost generation source, then this is what should happen. The world should transition by mid-century from 2/3 fossil fuels to less than 1/3 fossil fuel. And that's a big if. So what that means is wherever there's a choice and renewables is cheaper, you have to make it. So wherever you are in the world, that's the choice you need to make. And if you look, the top line there is our outlook. That's consistent with the chart I just showed you, but that still doesn't get us to where we want to be. So there needs to be more. There needs to be more policy, more investment, more build-out. We ran 2 scenarios. Last year we ran one around coal, and looking at the impact of coal, what we did is we said, what if coal was phased out by 2035? That's nobody's policy, but we said, okay, so what would happen if that was done globally? And what you would see is this. So actually a very big impact on CO2. So coal, and certainly preventing new coal build-out is very important. And that's a global statement. So around the world where people are thinking, particularly in some of these growth markets, there's a view that renewables is expensive or technically difficult or whatever. We need to make sure that no, they're putting in renewables wherever it is cost effective. But you can see that only takes you part of the way there. Why? Because a lot of that switching is to gas. And so then the question is what to do about that. So this year we ran a different scenario and we said, how much could you ramp renewables and electrification if money were no object? So don't worry about the money side of it, just take it to the max. And what we found is you can ramp renewables significantly. It does displace a lot of coal and some gas, as you'll see from that chart. But that doesn't get us all the way. So the top line is where we need to get to. And what we have is, so variable renewables is the maximum on the renewables piece, but you end up with what we call phase 2 technologies. So there are other technologies that are needed. And they're listed sort of examples on the right. So hydrogen is probably the most topical right now. We have a little bit of research to share on that. So hydrogen is possible, or some nuclear, or biogas, or CCS, CCUS, etc. So these things really do need to scale and come down in price and be additive to the renewables. And also what that means is that they need to fit well with the variable renewables. So this shows you actually low utilization rates, which is probably where those phase 2 technologies would be used, the costs. And so you can see some things play nicely with flexible renewables, some things play less nicely. It's tougher for nuclear than it is for hydrogen fuel cells. So again, just how that jigsaw fits together really does need to be understood. And then on the transport side, that was power. On the transport side, we're seeing electrification of passenger vehicles really take off. So this was the end of last year, nearly 5 million EVs on the road. We think another 2.4, 2.5 will be sold this year. And that's due to this, again, it's due to cost. So this happens to be the US, but what this shows you is for small, medium, large, and even SUVs, in the US, a lot of people drive SUVs, those are really where the sales are going. This shows you the internal combustion engine costs, the red line, and then the electric vehicle cost. And what you can see, the green piece at the top is battery technology. So you can really see how battery technologies are becoming cheaper and cheaper. And you're getting a 2022, 2024 cut-over point. And we believe that's where you'll see a real uptick. So there's already some uptake of EVs, but you're going to see a real acceleration of that sort of mid-2020s when it actually becomes cheaper to an electric vehicle than an ICE vehicle. And our projections using those costs, so no policy overrides, just those costs, suggest that sales will be sort of 57% by 2040. With policy overrides, that might increase. And what that gives you is just over a third, 37% cars on the road. So this is the fleet. So this is taking into account refresh rates. But that's only just a part of the barrel, if you like. If you look to the bottom left there, passenger vehicles, it's sort of gasoline. The question is, what about heavy goods vehicles? What about diesel? And so we've just started to do research into that. So at the moment, diesel is clearly cheapest. So economically, people should be choosing diesel, and they are. However, if you look on the right, just by 2025, so 5 or 6 years away, you're starting to see other technologies really become competitive. So CNG, LNG, and batteries. Hydrogen fuel cells, not yet, but roll the clock forward another 5 years, and they also become competitive. So even at the heavy goods side, you're going to see various technologies of clean energy becoming economically viable. And what does that do? So if you take all of that into account, actually for road transport, that puts us back emissions-wise where we started. So this is the emissions curve, and by 2040 we'll be back to the same level of emissions. So again, like on the power side, more and more is going to be needed to accelerate these trends. So more investment, more collaboration, etc. And what you can see is particularly where that road transport growth is coming from. So less from the sort of developed markets, and very much more from the high growth markets. So India, Southeast Asia, those kinds of places. Again, we need to make sure that they are getting the new technology, otherwise they will go down the path that we went down. And finally on industry. So industry is a big deal. It's been put into these hard-to-abate sectors, and much research has gone on. So a lot more people now are turning their focus to that. And it's a third of energy consumption. Industrial processing is making things, so manufacturing is a big deal. And really, it's these industries. So we see 6 big industries. There's 3 large: iron and steel, chemicals and cement are the largest, and then you have aluminium, food and tobacco, pulp and paper is the next 3. And those are really significant industries. So those industries really need to work out how to decarbonize. And in terms of geography, what's absolutely clear on manufacturing is it has to involve China. So it's either technologies going into China or it's technologies coming out of China. But this is really shows you where manufacturing really takes place in the world. And what you'll notice there is India is actually the second largest and growing very, very quickly. So again, it's those markets where we really, really need to understand how to decarbonize and implement these technologies. And of those 6, the big 3, if you like, actually turn out to be the hardest to abate. Sod's law, but that's sort of how it rolls. So iron, steel, cement, and chemicals, because they use a lot of coal. So coal comes up again. And it's really there where things like hydrogen would be most viable as feedstock as well as heating. So these are the choices we have. So this is temperature, so looking at high temperatures. Coal, oil, natural gas are on that list at the bottom, mainly with CCS. You have to have CCS technologies, otherwise they're not clean technologies. And then you have a number of other choices: electricity, syngas, hydrogen, etc. Hydrogen is the thing that we've spent last year looking at. I'll just show you a couple of slides on that. So this is levelized cost of production of green hydrogen. So this is using renewables to generate hydrogen. And what we're seeing is, if you look mainly on the left, so at a large scale, what you will see is by 2030, just the production. This isn't transport or storage, which has its own costs, which also need to be thought about. But just on the production side, we're seeing that by 2030, you're starting to see the cost of hydrogen come down to equal to fossil fuels. So it's starting to be viable. So in terms of that phase 2, choose renewables now, and by 2030, you're going to need some other technologies. That is viable if the right investment levels are going into hydrogen. And by 2050, it's very competitive. So by 2050, on the production side, hydrogen is very competitive. If you translate that into, we've looked at basically applying that then to various industries. And if you look, say, at the steel industry, again, you'll see versus coal or versus gas, this line coming down. So by 2030, you're touching and being competitive. By 2050, you're very competitive. And that's with sort of between $2 and $1 per kilogram of hydrogen. So that's just how we think about the world in terms of power, transport, and industry. I was in Japan last week, actually, the week before last. And again, a week after I saw the IPCC report presented. And President Abe, Prime Minister Abe, set up a whole week just to talk about the energy transition. So a very big change from the year before. I stayed an extra day. I stayed Saturday, although Saturday, if you remember, was actually the day that Typhoon Hagibis rolled over Tokyo. And it was a fairly eerie feeling. 30 million people city stops for 24 hours. There's no planes, there's no trains, there's no cars, there's no people. So absolutely silent. It was very interesting after spending a week talking about the theory of the energy transition to spend a day sitting under a typhoon. Really brought it home that now really is the time to be working